fun stuff for you, and a lot of it is tactile and sensory, so you'll be able to smell, touch, and it is a big group, but I definitely love show and tell. So we'll start just by passing around a couple small bars of beeswax, and if you haven't ever been, how many of you have ever not handled beeswax or harvested beeswax before? Okay, I have, but I just, I have to raise my hand.
Well, hopefully you have.
So are you going to tell us, I've got a bunch in jars, are you going to tell us what to do with it?
Of course I am. I'm going to tell you several things you can do with it. Do yourself a favor and rub it and smell it and feel it. I've had people put it in their mouth and bite on it, and I'm not going to be upset if you do that. It's okay, but I can't guarantee you won't pull a tooth out. So be careful. It is really sticky. All right, you're just waving. I thought you had a question. Okay, so here's one, and here's another. Rub them, smell them, feel them, squeeze and pass them around. That is very fresh, and if you notice, I'll start with the second thing that's going to go around. This is a votive candle. How many of you ever seen tea lights and votive candles and tapered candles? Okay, so this is a pretty standard style of candle. It's small. We're going to pass it around too. If you don't get to check it out when it ends up in the back, just kind of holler at the person that has it and try to get it to go around again. But there's a white kind of powdery look to the outside of the candle. That's called the bloom. It can mean a couple things. It can mean that the wax is really fresh and it's been handled well. It can also mean that the wax has been processed a bit, so you have to kind of use your nose and your eyes as your guide. Your wax should never smell bad. It should always smell fresh and have a little bit of a honey odor, which is really, I think, pleasant as far as beeswax goes. And we'll talk about the properties. So there's a votive with a little bit of the bloom that I'm talking about. How many of you ever seen this in one of your bees or in the hive? I know Sierra has, and you have as well. Yeah, I saw your picture.
That's one of the happiest moments I've ever had in beekeeping.
Yes. So this is not my picture, and I haven't seen it in a hive. I think once I saw a little bit, but the bee ran really fast, and I didn't want to mess with it. So, but
I saw it the other day.
In top bar hives, I think you'll see it a lot more, and also the characteristic of bees in top bar hives, they chain together and festoon a lot, and they produce a lot more wax than our bees in our Langstroth hives with foundation. So this is a trait, but this is what it looks like. So what happens is bees ingest a copious amount of amazing nectar, and then they have to secrete a fatty ester, and they make wax, kind of like we make ear wax, which is kind of gross to most people and doesn't have a purpose. Kind of has a purpose. It's supposed to help protect our ears. But they actually, of course, make it and then use it to construct their entire home in a way that is so strong and so completely spatially sound that they can store everything they need in there and also store all their food and all their babies. And it can be permeable, and it can also be waterproof. It can connect them by way of vibration. It deals with temperature well. It's just an amazing substance. So, ode to the honeybee for a half a second. Wax scales. Okay, Kevin, proceed. So, supplies. Supplies for working with wax can be really, really mellow in the form of recycled materials like juice containers. Just make sure when you work with wax, I have to give you the safety talk first before I go any further. Wax, in order to work with wax, you need to be able to get it into a liquid state. And it starts out of the hive in this state. And a lot of people ask, well, can I use all of the wax that I take out of my hive? Can I, scrape all the frames down? If I'm extracting honey and I don't have an extractor and I crush and strain, can I use all of it? You can, but generally I tell people try to take a good look at it. And again, use your senses. Use your nose. Use taste. Does it smell good? Does it taste okay? Is it fresh? What was the condition of the frame that you took it from? You don't want to take it from a hive that had wax moths or got slimed out by hive beetles, you know what I'm saying? So you want to process wax that's nice and clean. This wax, I'm going to pass this around again. If you want to open it, and squeeze it or touch it, you can, but you're gonna get sticky. You're gonna need to wash your hands, maybe. And if you wanna eat some, go right ahead. This is very clean wax I got from a removal we did at DeSoto State Prison, so in Arcadia. And they told us they had like 5 hives there. They had 12. And they were ginormous. And they were under sheds and under buildings and all over the place. The honey and the wax was stellar. It was beautiful, amazing honey. Most of the honey we extract in our operation goes through larger equipment, and so it's exposed to air in a centrifuge. And honey definitely loses something in that process. I crushed and strained all of this honey. I have some hardware cloth mounted on some wood in a little frame, and you can put it over a plastic tote or a food grade container, and you just literally crush it up, and because these bees had all natural comb, and let it drain out, and then the honey the aroma is retained. It's really amazing. And there's a lot of pollen in it. So I'm going to pass this around. Go ahead and give it a little smell, taste if you like. But that's the color I like to suggest people look with. And it is going to vary from, light, creamy tan and white colors all the way to your deep yellows and oranges. I mean, think about what the bees are eating and how those compounds may be getting incorporated into the wax that they're producing from their body. Kind of like, if we sweat and we go, did I eat onions or garlic yesterday? Because I sure do feel like I may have a little bit too much information, right? Okay, so the supplies could be anywhere from a mellow, kind of like recycled juice container to something that's been specifically made for preparing wax and pouring wax, like a pitcher. But basically what you're going to need is something to heat the wax up in, and I recommend a double boiler method. You can use a pot like the one that I have here, which I'll bring up on the table and carefully lift it up so everybody can see it, but it is quite hot. So if you go near it, I just want you to know. Here comes the safety talk. Working with wax, the most important thing you can do is be aware that you're working with something that has to get very hot and it's flammable. In order to use it and in order to make something that the end result is going to be good, you're going to have to liquefy it, and you're going to have to do it slowly. If you do it too quickly, it's going to smoke and have a burned smell and taste, and it's not going to be to your liking in the end, I guarantee you. So take your time. Also be prepared. Be near water so you can, if you do get wax on you that is in a liquid state, you're probably going to get a little burning sensation, and you could easily get a burn. So you have to be really super careful with wax. And again, at about 180, it is flammable. So never, ever, never, ever, ever, never, ever work with wax and leave it unattended. It's very important. If you don't go home with anything else, I would love for you to remember that it's very, very much flammable. I've never had smoke or fire working with wax, but I don't leave it unattended. I mean, maybe I'll use the bathroom, but that's about it.
I think it came around.
I don't see any teeth marks in it. Did everybody get to see one of these? If you haven't, you're welcome to come up and take a look. So the pouring pitcher is really handy. A container like a 5-gallon food grade pail is really handy. Paint strainer bags are pretty common. A lot of beekeepers use them for a lot of things, but you can go ahead and get a food grade wire mesh strainer bag if you want to work with something like that. If you're going to be using the wax in another preparation, I already had somebody ask, are you going to tell me things I can do with wax? We'll definitely go over more than just candles. A thermometer is handy, because what if you're melting it and you don't know if it's gotten too hot? So if you don't have that sense of knowledge that it's already in a liquid state, and I want to, because sometimes there's sediment in the wax. There's a name for it. Some people call it slum gum, but literally from some of the brood or some of the repeated use of wax that's in the hive, there's going to be occasionally some cocoon and some debris and some propolis and some other compounds that are going to end up in the wax. And you're going to end up with some of that, and I'll show that to you in a minute too. There's a little bit of darker wax in the bag that's going around, and that's going to be an indication. You might have a bee or two or a bee part, it's just a causality of what we're doing. I mean, we're as careful as can be, but it's going to happen once in a while, so you're going to need to strain it. I use nylon knee-high pantyhose, which is the only thing I ever use them for, because I would never wear a pair, but I do use them for straining wax. And I intended to bring one tonight, but I didn't bring one, so
Where can you even buy those?
Publix.
Okay.
Yeah, they have like this mini like socket behind it. Walgreens. Section Walgreens.
I use
Mold
I use
release.
nature.
This is my my mold release. There are many. This just happens to be my favorite one. And the funny thing about this mold release, besides the name, is that I invariably put it in a container, and I did it tonight. My daughter is going to laugh when I go home tonight because she's going to ask me, how was your wax presentation? Oh, it was really good. Did you depress the button on the mold release on the way there accidentally? Yeah, I did. So it was in the bucket with everything, and I heard shh, and I was like, oh no! And I had to stop and move things around because it is, if you read the caution on it and when you go to buy it, you're going to get a little bit of chemical data hazard material. It is something you don't want to breathe. My older daughter, not the one who knows about me depressing the button, works in a florist, and whenever she sees me use that, she watches me like a hawk to make sure I'm not getting vapors because she doesn't want me to breathe it in. So I don't recommend doing it in a very small closed area, but you use this to spray your silicone molds. And I'm going to pass these around too. I have quite a few, so I'll pass them all around. This one's really handy, and a lot of people ask about things like this. If you want to make wax to resell to other people, you can make 1 pound blocks or the little ones like I sent around, or you can get very decorative and find cute little soap molds with little bees on them and make those. So this definitely holds a pound. When you buy a silicone mold from someone, a reputable company, they're going to have information in there about the size of the wick that goes in the mold, how much wax, liquid wax by the ounce will fit in the mold. And this will also help you if you're trying to determine, say you have a value per pound of your wax already in mind, or you've done a little research about how much per pound. Hey.
They may not know what you mean by the size of the wick.
Oh, sure. We're going to get into that fun factor too. So then when you do determine, and we'll talk about the wick size in a minute, and some other things, when you determine the weight and the wick size, what I was going to say was write it on the outside of your mold in a Sharpie. This way you'll always have that information. You could write it on the outside of the bag that's on your mold, but more than likely, maybe write it in both places. But either way, it's going to help you tremendously. Because when you really get down to making, 4 of those, 5 of those, 3 of those, all in one sitting, you're going to calculate how much wax you need before you even get started, and have kind of a system set in place for everything, basically. So I'll pass this around too. And Julie already noticed that I wrote on the outside of it, and I brought it for you. I have more than one of these, but I wrote crappy molds. It's a crappy mold, and I'll pass this crappy mold around with the candle because it makes Buddha's lips look really funny. So I don't use it very often, and I don't want to use it, so I make sure I write that on the outside. But if I'm really desperate, I might have to use it. So. Molds and wicks. So we're talking about molds a little bit. There is a plethora of molds. Sure, question?
I noticed earlier when I was smelling that the mold doesn't have anywhere near the nice smell that the other one does.
Which one?
The 2 big ones you were just holding?
Didn't have a lot of smell to it, like a lot of the chemical smell is gone from the silicone?
A lot of the honey smell of it.
Okay, gotcha. Well, when you get to working with these molds, there's going to be a difference in the composition of the silicone. You'll notice this is a real firm silicone, and this one's a lot softer, so I'll pass these around. And what I was starting to get at is there's a giant selection of molds out there in the world, and they come from all over the world. So depending on what your interests are in, cute little animals and Buddhas and lotus flowers and things with bees on them, you'll have to do a little research as to the quality of the silicone. And what it equates to is how many candles you're going to get out of the mold, basically. And how well it's, the hole where the wick is going to go is going to maintain, you okay? Its shape. So basically, the people that sell beekeeping supplies are in it to sell products that are good quality, is what I would like to share with you from my experience. So when I get candle molds, I generally get them from a person who produces lots and lots of candle molds. Either that's their only thing, the only thing they do, or they do it for, and beekeeper supply companies buy them. Because I want molds that are going to make hundreds of candles and not crap out versus the one that's a little softer. It's a cool mold, I love it, but it's not holding up. And the other, so we'll get into the wick, and then there's another thing to show you. Some of them have rubber bands, you'll notice. So it's going to have a volume of wax that it holds. It's going to have a size of wick, and we're going to go into the wicks just a little bit, but basically, even if you didn't know anything about wicks, even if you didn't learn the art of candle making, most of the companies that sell them are going to tell you a recommendation wick size to use with your candle. So you're not in the dark completely. You can do this. Don't worry. It's okay. So even with that said, it varies. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but I want to tell you one more fun thing that I learned that I love to share with everybody. Test burn your candles before you sell them to other people. Because there's a chart out there with wick sizes and a generalization. This 2/0 wick is good for 2-inch round diameter taper or pillar candles. That's not always the case. This 60 wick is supposed to be good for bigger candles. It's a big wick. It's probably good for a big candle, right? I use it in a teeny tiny little owl mold and the big Buddha mold. And it burns properly. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too, but I kind of go off on tangents here and there, but here's what I wanted to show you. This is my cute little owl mold, so you'll notice the wick size is written on the outside, and it's super faded, but it says 2.26 ounces. So I have an idea of how many ounces of wax is going to fit in there. And then it has this handy dandy slice in it, so that when the candle has been formed and dried and cooled, I can easily get it out without putting 25 fingernail marks in it, hopefully. But that's part of the skill set. And the rubber band helps keep the mold shut tight and also keep the seam from bulging out, having hot molten liquid wax fall all over your countertop at home. Because you know you're going to do this in your kitchen, right? They don't. Good question, Julie. Do all the molds have slits? Nope, they don't. This one doesn't. I have to push this one out, and very carefully so. So let me give you a little bit more info, and then we'll get more into what to do. And this is the one I wanted to send around with it. There you go.
Can you see the line where the split is in wax?
This one has two slits.
Oh,
Like
no, on the
finished
wax.
Candle. No, not if you close it right and the candle mold is made nicely. Did you just get your hair done?
Yeah, I
looks nice.
went shorter.
I like it. It's hot. It is hot. It is hot. All right, so we talked about a double boiler or a pot to use dedicated to wax. So that statement, dedicated to wax. Dedicated to wax is because you don't want your husband or wife or family member to get mad at you when you ruin the kitchen, which I've done. I've had to scrape wax off my tile for a very long time, and it's still there. I always think it's gone, and I come back and I see that little spot that got dirty again, and I'm like, yeah, it's still there. I'm still in trouble. So dedicate the equipment you're using and the things you're melting the wax in, and maybe even the space. In other words, be a little bit preparatory in using whatever it is that you have around, cardboard, newspaper, things of that nature. Because once it gets wax on it, it's going to stay there for a really long time. A scale is helpful if you're going to calculate any kind of recipe for making things other than candles, or if you're going to make multiple candles and you really want to have your game on when you get started. You don't want to, say you have wax out there in the shed and you're in the house, you don't want to stop what you're doing and run out and get more. So the scale comes in handy. Tins, tubes, or containers for lip balms or salves. It's kind of cool to reuse things like little, my daughter made candles. She went to the thrift store and she found cute little teacups that had like an antique look to them, and she made candles in those, and they looked really nice and sold really well. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do. May I have the next slide, please?
Yes, you can. I'm going to give you this right here. I got the PC guy came in and fixed it.
You're awesome. Thank you.
Embroidery works now.
Question, young lady, this mold you sent around here, it says Crappy on it. Is that a brand name or an
No, it's not a brand name, and I apologize, I forget the name, but the yellow molds that are going around came from Man Lake. And they have a really good selection of a denser, denser silicone. But that's what I call it. You know I like you if I use the word crappy in the name.
Yeah, but it wasn't aesthetic.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
wasn't anything in mind.
No,
Right?
it is, well it is now because Buddha's lips don't look very good when I use that mold.
So did it get worse? You
It
used
didn't
it
get
was
better.
good?
It doesn't get better. Yeah, it doesn't get better.
They never fixed it.
Yeah, never fixed. No, that's what I thought. So I just kept making more candles, and it didn't work. I was hopeful. Okay, so people we are asking, how do we even get into the process of having these cappings, and what do we do? Like, well, basically, if you're going to be pulling frames of honey from your hive, and we talked a little bit about the crush and strain method. So if you have hives that don't have any kind of, say that again.
They're here.
Oh, okay.
And it's right here.
Did they call for a break or something?
But I just told them to go out.
Oh, cool.
They go set up and they can.
Yeah, they just pulled it. Okay, so we're getting close to a break. Did anybody not get to see this? Anybody? Would you like to?
No, well, my question about it is, I've got some of that Brazilian pepper honey, or wax from last year, and it's a bright yellow, and then I've got this, I got like 3 or 4 different harvests and 3 or 4 different colors of wax. You can just put it all together?
Sure, sure you can. Or if you think you're not going to care for one over the other, melt a little bit of it and let it dry and take a look at it and see what you think. I mean, you can blend anything. You can blend honeys, you can blend anything, but are you going to like it? You know, do you want to dull that brightness and mix other waxes in it, or do you think that?
And you don't go through a procedure to get the honey out of it that might be left in it?
Yes, yes I do.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I do.
Are
So
you
that's
gonna
what we're
enlighten
going to
us
talk
on that?
about. That's what we're going to talk about. So whether you take the frames from a hive that is foundationless and you crush and strain them like I described over a hardware cloth, the honey drains at the bottom, you're left with this, which is, it's got some honey in it. It's not no honey, but it's pretty good. What I then do is put this in the freezer for 24 hours. I'm going to try to reduce, retard, and or annihilate anything that might be alive in there and try to grow and crawl around. So 24 hours usually will do the trick. And if you don't have foundationless frames and you're not doing the crush and strain method, you are basically removing the cappings from your honey frames that you're going to be extracting honey from. And the cappings is the most desirable wax to use for producing anything. It's cleanest, newest, freshest wax in the hive. Because even people reuse their honey super frames over and over again for several seasons or cycles. But the cappings is put on every single time you put that frame back in. So you're going to remove the cappings, and you can strain them any way you like. I mentioned the paint strainer bag, but you can use a hardware cloth mounted. If you're handy, you can make something. You can use a kitchen strainer. You know, pasta one day, wax the next. No, it's now for wax.
You know what? I use my torch that I use for lighting my smoker to clean my pans.
Awesome.
And
it works pretty good.
It's amazing. You have to be careful to burn yourself. So you
Right.
use the torch to melt the wax and then a paper towel.
Yeah,
And it's like perfect.
if you catch it when it's liquid and hot, just like Sierra said, you can get a couple paper towels. Be careful. You're possibly gonna burn yourself. I got a little wax on my thumb before I got here because I was trying to make this nice and clean for all of you, and it hurt a little bit. So be careful. I don't want you to go home and play with this and get hurt. But you can get things pretty clean. Normally this pot looks a lot worse. It still looks pretty gnarly,
A
but it
hair
usually
dryer
looks a
and
lot
paper
worse.
towel work real good too.
What's that?
A hair dryer.
Hair dryer. Awesome.
Heat gun, no
Heat
hair dryer, heat gun.
Hair dryer, torches, we're beekeepers, we got this. Fire!
I am cold.
Yeah, I look at a lot of YouTube demonstrations for all this stuff. And one thing they were saying was that, and I didn't get a chance to ask you real quick about the silicone molds that said, hey, we don't need the release.
You don't have to use the release. And so, did everybody hear that? This nice woman was talking about watching some YouTube videos and how some of the silicone mold suppliers and companies and or people that make candles mention that you don't need the release. I rarely use the release now. When I first started, I was a little bit more concerned about my ability to get the candle out. because I didn't have a lot of skill. I hadn't done it a lot. So I thought, well, this is going to be a little difficult, so I better use the release. Better be safe than sorry.
And the release is what?
This is a silicone, so it's like using pan.
Oh,
Silicone is all it is.
And so it makes it easier to get the candle out.
But there was one other thing too, when you were talking about cleaning the pouring or melting.
Yeah.
This one woman was saying she took, before she did anything, she put jojoba oil, a thin coat.
Sure.
So that she could,
Sure.
it was easier to just
Yep.
swish it. She was using a Pyrex
Yeah.
measuring cup, and
You can-
she did it just a little bit with the
Yep.
jojoba oil and paper towel.
Mhm.
And then when she was finished, it just, you know,
Oil works good. Coconut oil works good.
Depends on the shape, doesn't it? The
What's
thing
that?
about the spray is it gets into more intricate spots.
Crevices, yeah. So if you have a lot of detail, you're gonna want to rely on something that can travel. But again, whatever you use is gonna leave possibly a coating on the outside of what you're making. So the release tends to leave a little shiny kind of surface on the outside, and I kind of like the au naturel version, so I try to forego it. So maybe I would try a little coconut oil.
I always worried about the release breaking down the
The mold?
Yeah.
I think over time it would. I really do.
But
And
I
I'd
have
be-
this fancy egg
Yeah,
mold that's got all the texture to it and everything.
yeah.
And it would always, one little spot would always tend to break off whenever you broke it out, so I started using that, and the mold just really didn't seem the same afterwards.
Yeah.
You know.
So there's a lot of factors, use, wear, heat, temperature fluctuations, and we'll get a little bit into, I want to make sure I get to the point of telling you how to let things cool, because a lot of us want to go fast because we're busy, but I want you to promise me that you won't put your big candles in the freezer. Promise me now. If you do you want to know why? Who wants to know why? If you don't, if you do that, they're going to crack. And you're going to be so sad because you're going to have to melt it all down and start all over again. But that's the good news. You can melt it all down and start all over again. So it is really forgiving in that sense. But yeah, you have to let it cool down slowly. And there's a lot of good books, YouTube videos and things out there. So if there's things I didn't cover, you're going to pick up more pointers and experiment and you'll learn more. But you can insulate things. You can make a cute little box with a towel in it and put your molds in there to let them cool down slowly. The bigger the candle, the bigger the piece of wax or the sculpture or whatever you're doing, the longer it's going to take. We can't rush it as much as we would like to. But anyway, here we go. We cut the cappings from the frame that we're extracting honey from, and we're allowing it to drain. And then we freeze it for 24 hours to get rid of the creepy crawlies. And the fresh cappings, which we passed around, contain a lot of honey. We talked about the sediment. We talked about the flammable. It melts at about 180. It could go on fire at about, 160. It could go on fire at about 180. So there's not a lot of play as far as the increase. You really got to be careful.
and never use a microwave. To melt it.
I don't
I've seen that too on
I don't know
YouTube.
a microwave. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But I've heard of and seen that also.
It does work, but it's not the best.
Yeah, some people do this, and this is really, I tried it once and it was horrifyingly messy and I didn't get good results from it. And it brings me to a point, when we do this, like in this case, we had, a good garbage can full of wax cappings after we were done with this. And a lot of times I'll tell people the same thing by the way of showing them like a 5-gallon bucket. And after we process it all down, we end up with like a couple pound disc of wax. It's a lot of work for little reward. It really is. So I did this right before I left just to show you guys, to pass it around. And it's a little warm, but it's not hot, so you won't get hurt, I promise. But I took about this amount of cappings in that very pour pitcher and over a double boiler, slowly, gently, while I was taking a shower and not attending it. No, I was watching it the whole time. Stayed with it. And I melted it down and I allowed it to cool. I was driving, so when it was liquid on the way here, it did move around a little bit, but I want you to see what I ended up with from about that amount of wax. This is a pretty good yield actually from that little. Yeah, I only had wax about up to here in the pitcher, but look at how much honey is in there. And by the time you're done with this, the honey is kind of dark, and it could be still okay, You might want to bake with it or give it to somebody.
Dale, what do you do with that?
Nothing.
So you just feed it and do not feed it back to your bees.
Yeah, somebody asked about that and said that they could do that, and I was gonna mention, it's a little tricky feeding any honey back to your bees. You really gotta be careful. So, but, I mean, to each their own. I don't really wanna get too into it.
I heard that when you keep the honey, it
Sorry.
changes.
So this was a trick. I passed around a sticky container.
So what do you do with that then?
Okay, so now this is the next step.
No, I mean with the honey.
Well, I don't do anything with it. I usually store it in my pantry and I have too much of it in there and eventually I'll throw it away or give it to somebody. But
Well, I typically toss mine out
if it's
into a garden bed.
if it's halfway decent, I give it to friends for baking. If they want to bake
It's still that good?
it. Taste it. You can decide. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is.
All you're doing is heating it up and then pouring it and it separates on its own?
Yeah, I use the nylon stocking to strain it once. And I hang that up and let that settle and,
It doesn't melt the nylon?
Yeah, I'm surprised.
And be
Nylon's
careful.
got a higher melting temperature.
Yeah, close to the top. Be careful what container you use. As high density grade, if you're gonna reuse things like plastic juice containers, as high density hard plastic as you possibly can. That one doesn't always hold up very well, the Simply one, but the Publix organic lemonade bottles work really good. We drink a lot of lemonade, so, well, I don't, but my family does, so we have a lot of them, but that one held up pretty good. So it settles, and then I basically cut it open, take the wax out, wash it, and then I'm ready to make a candle with it. So I've only processed it once, one time. This is the other method. This is using hot water. I hated it. It was awful. I'm never doing it again. Hot water in a bucket with the wax so that the wax melts, and then when it cools, there's the honey water and sediment underneath the wax cake at the top. Baloney. It was horrible. It was a mess. But if you want to try it, go right ahead. Basically, once this is cool and the wax is cool and it's a hard cake, you can try to reuse the container and either use some spray, the silicone mold or oil in there, and pop the wax out if the shape is going to allow that. Or you can use scissors and cut it open. There's going to be honey on the bottom. So it's going to be a little messy. Do it over something. And again, you can either retain the honey and use it for something or give it away. And then you'll wash the block of wax really well. There's going to be a little bit of a dark color on the surface of it. And you're going to remelt that down one time. And then you're going to make your candle with it. If you feel like there's a lot of sediment, you can filter it one more time. You can filter it as many times as you want, really. So, okay. You need to be able to hear. If I talk loud, is that going to mess you up? Okay, good. All right, so we talked about the water, hot water, wax cappings, melting, filtering, let it cool into a cake method. And then I didn't care for that method, remember that? But some people like it, so you might want to try it. And the other method is the same, but so this is where I have a pot with hot water and another container inside. So I will go like to the thrift store or someplace and get a 2-quart stock pot or a bigger stock pot. And then I have this pour pitcher. All of the cappings are in here, the hot boiling water, and slowly, and again, careful, be very, very careful, because not only is the water hot, but if the wax is hot, you can get burned. So just be careful. Keep the simmer low so that it's not splattering all over you, and also the volume of wax in here so that it's not going to hurt you if you start playing around with this, because this is a lot it gets heavy when it's full with liquid wax. What's your question, Julie?
How long does it take for the water to actually begin boiling?
If I turn it on high on a burner, I can usually get water to boil in several minutes.
I'm talking about in the crock pot.
In the crock pot, I don't use the crock pot as a double boiler.
Okay.
So if you're going to use the crock pot method, you put the wax in the crock pot. And it's kind of like the one that I have here on the floor that I'm going to show you, which is called a Presto pot. So anything that has its own mechanism to be heated, that you're willing to sacrifice and designate to wax, you can melt the wax in. Just do it at a lower temperature because they tend to heat up really quickly. Okay, so either way, you're going to take the cappings in whatever method you choose, and you're going to slowly and carefully melt it all down, and you have the option to filter it any way you like, but I use nylon, and I do it right into this pitcher. I literally drape the nylon over the outside, pour the wax in, and then I pour my candles. So we're going to set up a mold in a minute. So you can see, this is another interesting method. So for anybody that has lots of hives, the honey hasn't been heated and the cappings haven't been heated and they're very fresh, you've just cut them off the frames, you can use a little kiddie pool. Or if you don't want to go that big, you can just use like a baking tray or some sort of plastic tote lid or something like that, and spread them out and put them out not very close to the hives, but out where your hives are, and they will clean them up. If you put them close to the hives, you run into the risk of robbing behavior, which isn't desirable, especially this time of year.
Don't worry, the bees will find it.
Yes, but so don't worry, wherever you put it, the bees are going to find it.
Really quickly.
Yep. Yes, very quickly.
The further away you can do it in your yard, the better.
So we talked a lot about molds and the spray release. Whether you want to use it or not is up to you, but I say the newer molds are when I find the most need to use the spray release. Once I've used them a couple times, I really don't feel like it needs it anymore, but maybe every once in a while if I've had an issue, like say I used wax that had too much honey in it. Maybe it got a little sticky. You can wash these molds out with soapy water, warm soapy water, let them dry, and then reapply some sort of release. Basically, you can put, what it says here is a thin layer of plastic wrap over the surface of the mold, or use a bag. So for storage, wherever you put this, you're going to want it to stay free from dust and debris and things, because whatever gets inside this mold is going to show up on your candle. Whether it be dust or dirt or something that imparts color. And you can add things if you want to. I mean, you can decorate as much as you like. You can use pretty much anything you want. I've seen people use beads, glitter. There's colorants specifically designed for candle making, and fragrances. So there's lots of options with making candles in that sense. But in the meantime, you may want to put your candle molds in a container with a lid, or seal them with a little bit of plastic wrap, or in a Ziploc bag just to keep them from getting dusty and dirty. And when you want it, do you have a question?
Have you ever heard of cleaning them, like taking, not boiling water, but hot water before it really starts to boil?
Yep.
And just soaking them in there for a little bit?
Yep.
And everything release and clean them and take them out?
Yep. Hot water, just dipping it in there, or actually washing it with soapy water, whatever works best for you. I'm going to use this lid, and I'm going to move some stuff so you guys can see. And if you can't see, we can take a minute for everybody to get up and look. But I'm going to set up one candle mold. I have some highly technical apparatus here for candle making. I have 2 chopsticks broken in half and a clothespin. Now, we didn't get to talk too much about the wicks yet, so I'm going to go over that while we're actually going through the slide about pouring the candle. And I'm going to pass around these too. As I said before, you're not in the dark, even just from ordering good quality supplies from a beekeeping supplier or a candle making supplier, because they're going to be happy to talk to you about the proper size wick for the candle you're making. And then you're going to experiment with a couple wicks and also test burn your candles and see how they burn. So here's 2 sizes. This is a 60. And remember I said before, it's deceiving. It's a big, thick wick, and it almost makes you feel like it needs to be in a bigger candle, but that's not necessarily the case. And here is a 2/0, not to be confused with a number 2, because there is a number 2. So why did I have to say all that confusing stuff? Because there are probably about 20 or 30 different size wicks out there, and they're also made of different materials. Some are already prepared before you buy them with what's called like a little pin at the bottom. And these are used in this style mold. This is different than the silicone mold. So this wick has already been pickled. And no, I'm not talking about pickles, even though they sound really good right now. This pickling process is basically preparing the wick for adhering to the wax that's being poured in, and all it really means is it's been dipped in wax. It's just a fancy way of saying that it's been prepared. And one of the molds that I passed around, actually a couple of them, already had wax on the wick. So I've already pre-pickled these wicks before I got here. I'm not going to try to say that 3 times fast. So I'm going to pass this around too, but here's a votive mold with a couple of the, here, you want to pass this around? A couple of the wicks inside. And also sometimes you can find little candle forms for the tea lights also with the appropriate wick. So this is why we experiment with the wicks. I ordered these tea light holders, and I ordered the votive mold, and then I ordered that size wick, which goes to the votive. I also ordered a smaller size that said it was for tea lights, and I made a bunch of them, and I sold them before I test burned them. And the guy was really nice, and he came back to me and he said, you know what? I love these, and I just had to take all the wicks out and use my own like hemp string because I couldn't get them to stay lit. And I was like so embarrassed. I was like, oh no. So that taught me the lesson of test burning. And I had read it, but I didn't listen. So I now use that votive wick for these tea lights, and it works much better. So even though that's what was recommended for this specific candle, it didn't work good for me. Maybe it has something to do with the wax that I'm using. It could be anything. Everything doesn't have like a definite. There's no finite definite. So you have to experiment a little bit. So this mold already has the wax pickled, and all I literally did, and when I put wicking in a mold, I put extra. I really don't want to spend, every candle I make, put a new piece of wick in there. So I try to put excess. You can wrap it around the outside of the mold if you need to. And then I dip it in wax and I lay newspaper on the counter so I don't get in trouble or have to scrape it all off with my spatula and then get beeswax on my grilled cheese. And I lay it to dry. Now there's another thing we'll talk about. When I told you the wick has to be appropriate, I also wanted to tell you the tension on the wick is important too. So if it's really tight or really loose, when you go to test burn your candle, your flame could be too big or too small and go out. So that is going to affect the way the candle burns as well. So this is where practicing and experimenting is going to come into play. For me, I don't make it too tight, and I'm going to set this one up, and you guys are welcome to come look at it. Basically, there's a couple things that you need to do when you set these up. First of all, you need to breathe and be calm. Because making candles should be a very relaxing experience. And I always ask people, are you a calm person? Do these kinds of tasks irritate you? Because candle making may or may not be a good thing for you. Some people, they start cursing and throwing things around and getting frustrated. And it can be really frustrating. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in candle making. So just take a chill pill, make a cup of tea, get ready for your candle making. It should be a good experience. Leveling your mold is very important. You have wicking coming out on the bottom, and it's going to affect the level of the mold. It's not going to sit flat on a surface. What do I use to fix that? My handy dandy chopsticks. So I have a couple broken chopsticks. Sometimes there's a little extra wax on the outside, and that gets in the way. You just got to pull that off. But that gives me a place to level my mold. If you want to be really geeky and get out a little level, go right ahead. What's wrong with that? Nothing. You want your candle to be flush to the base when you pour it. I can tell it's off a little bit right now because, I have a good eye. That's supposed to be funny. You're supposed to laugh. And, but I have at times taken out a level, and I admittedly say that.
If you're making a lot of them, why don't you just use a baking cooling rack? It has holes in it for the wicks to go through.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, any cool idea you have, make sure to share it with me. Yeah, that's the cool part. Like, we all get together and you say something and I go, oh yeah, I never thought of that. So there's all these neat things you could do to streamline your process. We didn't even talk about dipping candles yet, but can you imagine the type of space and things that you would need in order to make tapered candles and hold them? There are nifty racks that are made for the process, or maybe you make your own dowel rack and you have your own space designated for it. So it's cool. So we have the two on the bottom, or the cool wire cooling rack method, and we have two on the top edge. And basically what we need now is something to hold the wick. And the thing that holds the wick has to be bigger than the diameter of the opening in the mold. Otherwise, it's going to fall in there. Because with a really small opening, like cute little panda here, I can use a bobby pin. but I'm gonna reserve my clothespin for my next size opening, and so on and so forth. I've been known to masking tape a bobby pin to a chopstick to make it bigger. I mean, there's all kinds of fun ways. I really do. That's the part that I enjoy and is very relaxing. So basically, you want to get some tension there with the wick, but not too much. You want it to rest on top of the clothespins or whatever you're using. And the big thing here is it needs to be centered in the candle mold cavity. And being that these candle molds have different shapes and different designs, some of them are really lend themselves nicely to burning slowly and burning evenly. And then some of them have like a little bitty thing here and then like a big thing here and then they go back down. They're decorative and they look really cool, but they don't necessarily burn really well. So again, it's, you know, what do you want to do with your candles? You want functional candles or do you want decorative candles? I have people buy candles, I see them a year later and they say, I didn't burn that food dog I bought from you. And I'm like, why not? Burn it and then, you know, come get another one. Whatever you got to do. So we have our mold set up. And you can set up multiple molds at a time. And if you use a scale and you measure your wax before you melt it, you have a pretty good idea of how many candles you're going to be able to pour before you even get started. I set this up before I got here. It's hot. This is not my preferred pot. I like to do a double boil. And this Presto pot, which I'll show you in a second here, it's pretty cool. It's not my favorite, but it's pretty cool. It has a little spout here, which is super useless. It doesn't get hot enough. And there was another tip on there that I took off. So the wax is liquid in here, and as it's traveling through this really small diameter, it starts to cool and get plugged up. I've broken chopsticks and bamboo skewers and all kinds of stuff trying to use that, and then I gave up. And I don't use it anymore. Or put a torch to it. Put a torch to it. Whatever you come up with. Hair dryer or heat gun, whatever you got. So my goal is to not make a huge mess and not get hurt or not hurt anybody.
I went to a thrift store and I bought an old aluminum coffee pot that had a spout on it.
Awesome.
And I put the wax in there and melted it down, plugged it in, and just poured my coffee.
Awesome. Normally, I would have a nylon stocking here because there is some sediment in the wax and in my my pot, but I didn't remember my nylon, so we're just going to pour it that way. This wax smells delightful. Has anybody been able to smell it since they got here? Have you been up in the front room at all? Now, basically, it's really a matter of how you want to stream the wax in. I recommend a slow, steady stream. Use another hand if you need to brace it, but you're just going to come up to the base and flush level of the mold. The silicone molds are super forgiving, and this is a small candle, so as it cools, it's going to shrink. I want to put a little bit more wax than is needed there, but if it gets moved, which it already did, it started to come out of the mold. If I poured it and I poured a little bit too much and it didn't move, it would shrink nicely and create a flush surface. But that's in a perfect world. You're going to have a lot of meltdowns with candles. Meaning you're going to melt the candle back down. Basically. So the next thing that I would do with this is I would let them all sit together and I would wait very slowly for this to set. And I'm not going to look for it to set till it's like this, completely set. So I would say about 15 minutes for this size candle, 15 minutes to a half hour, I would go back to this mold, and what I would do is check the surface. And if it was already dry at the surface, be careful. There is possibly liquid wax in here. Be very, very careful, please. I would gently pick it up and I would remove the chopsticks and the clothespin, and I would pull the wick down to the flush base of the candle mold. That's now the bottom of your candle. And you don't have to trim it or anything. It's flush. Now, if you have a tricky mold that doesn't have any slices in it, and you're worried that you're not going to be able to pull that candle out when it's dry without gnarling it up really bad, leave a little bit of wick there. And again, as these are drying slowly, you'll get a feel for the length of time it takes for this wax to solidify, but you may notice it's still slightly pliable, and you go to take the candle out and you can push that wax in the base, or you can set up a little makeshift flat surface with some aluminum foil or a pan that you want to designate, and you can re-flatten the surface, the base of your candles again, if you'd like to go that extra step. And furthermore, if you handle candles like this one, like we've been passing it around, touching it, people have been picking it up at the market when you're selling things, you're going to find fingerprints on it. You can take that fine nylon that you're going to strain with, or a fine cloth that doesn't secrete any kind of lint or anything, you can polish the surface. As long as it's not like a deep scratch or a mark, you'll be able to put a shine back on the candle and take some of those marks out. So that's it. I mean, that's a lot of it right there. And most of it is just going to be experimentation. So most of the ones we talked about were in a mold. We mentioned tapers, and they're dipped. We didn't talk about rolled candles. How many of you ever seen 100% pure wax foundation before? It comes in a rainbow of colors, the whole rainbow, and you can really make some nice candles with it. I've seen people make cute little birthday candles, giant cylinder candles. You can take pieces of it and marry it to other pieces by way of squeezing or using a dowel or another tool, and you can incorporate other colors into the mix, so you can really play around with it. A lot of fun. Rolled candles are great. They burn a little faster than some of these other candles. Burn time is another interesting thing about candles. Beeswax candles have a good long burn time as compared to, and some people mention that they've worked with paraffin before and other waxes. Beeswax burns nice, slow, doesn't secrete a lot of smoke or emit a lot of smoke, and people say it cleans the air. So whatever your principle or belief is there, it can possibly be a healthful thing to do.
Is there a formula that will let you know if you decide you wanted to make a candle, a column candle, and you want it to burn, let's just say 100 hours. I know it would depend on the dimension of the candle and the height, but is there a formula that you can figure out?
If you do some, yeah, sure. If you do some research on the internet, it's basically finding the cavity. So did everybody hear the question? It relates to how many hours a candle will burn and trying to decide how much wax you would need. And my answer is going to involve the size of the candle. Because a lot of the candles, like if you get familiar with the different shapes that are more simple, like the pillars, you'll see them, the 4-inch one. There's a chart online with some companies that sell candles that make a point of making sure the customer has a lot of information when they go to purchase them, like the benefits of burning candles, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things they'll tell you is this candle has a 20-hour burn time. So if I'm not aware of it or I can't find the information, I just do research online, and then I test burn it. And believe you me, I don't just burn one candle, I burn 3, and then I keep a log. So my daughter and I will sit and we'll just stare at the candles. No, we don't stare. But we'll keep a log and we'll go back and check it periodically, and we're looking for the size of the flame. We write down what wick we used. If we felt like we were a little loose with the tension, it's just like making meat or honey. It's just like anything, cooking. If you get a recipe of something you really like, you're gonna want to remember what you did or maybe have it written down. So we try very hard to keep records on that level. But some of these candles, like this one, could burn a good 30 hours. And Buddha can burn a good 30 hours. Rudy?
A regular candle, an average candle, does it burn at the same rate, or does it burn faster as it burns down?
When you say a regular candle, like non-fancy. Yeah, I actually think that the more straight-sided, non-decorative candles have a better burn time. I see the flame fluctuate more when it gets to the decorative areas. So if it's burning down, it might hit a decorative area, and again, it could be thin here, thick here, thin here, and sometimes the flame will shoot up a little and then go back down. Here's a little bit more info about
or if the wax
runs off. So depending on the tension, the size of the candle, the correct wick, the amount of honey in the wax, the age of the wax, the type of wax, 80 million other factors, there's going to be some wax pooling in the candle as you burn it. There's going to be a lot of interesting things, just like any candle. They say one of the best things to do to extinguish a candle is not to blow it out. Who knows what to do? Julie? Cover it, you snuff it, or you take your handy dandy chopstick and you push the wick into the liquid pool of wax and then stand it back up. So now your wick is repickled for the next time and it doesn't smoke when you extinguish it. So if you don't have a candle snuffer, that's the way to go if you want to keep from having a lot of smoke in the house.
One more quick question is there, if you can make a candle, well, let's just say your 30-hour candle, and realizing somebody has to be there when it's on.
You're next.
Can you let it burn for 30 hours straight, or is it better to do it in increments?
You can, but they say, that's the other thing I've read. A lot of people say burn the candle for a minimum of an hour, and they don't have any recommendations on exceeding a specific amount of time. But as anything else that's using heat or fire, if you leave it going for a long time, what may occur? It may get very hot. It may stay very hot, and the liquid wax, I don't know, depending on the size of the flame.
Down into the candle,
Yep.
maybe.
Yep.
All right.
So again, it's just like preparing it. Candles should never be used unattended anyway. They should always be on a base that can accommodate the wax that may run off or drip. And it should always be in a place that you would be not concerned could be a fire hazard. So you know, use caution and safety
Yeah,
when.
I realize that, but
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the actual, is it better to burn with all your
I've
safety
never read that.
5, 6 hours
Right.
and then stop, or
I've
you
never-
burn it the whole 30 hours?
I've never read that you had to not burn it the whole entire time till it goes out. So, and I have burned them till they have expired and had no problems. So, I don't have a conclusive on that one, but I don't see a problem with it. 1 second, Julie.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention kind of a cautionary tale about buying wicks. Because there are a lot of prepared wicks that have lead in them.
Correct.
And the ones that are pickled, a lot of times with paraffin, if you're trying to, if you have your own clean beeswax, you know, you even have treatment-free beeswax, and then you sit there and add paraffin wick, and then on top of it, one that has got lead in it too, you're kind of defeating the whole purpose. So
Sure.
when you purchase it, just make sure, I think, 100% cotton, and then pickle it yourself with your own beeswax. If you really want to get it.
Sure. So for anybody that didn't hear, we're just talking about what could be in the wick if you buy it prepared with wax already. Could contain paraffin or other waxes that aren't as clean as the waxes you're getting. And they could also be lined with lots of things, tin, lead, other things. So it's a choice for you to decide what you would like to use in your candles. There's lots of options available. Typically speaking, for me, I usually go with a beekeeping supplier. But even then, I've still seen some instances where there were wicks that were lined and I wasn't happy with them. You're going to be next. Julie, you're next, and then you're next.
I didn't know it was lined.
Usually they tell you in the description.
What I was gonna ask you is, soy is supposed to be an excellent form of burning of candles. Can you mix the soy and the beeswax?
I have not tried it, but I've met people who have. Okay, sure. Thank you. So Julie's question was, she's heard soy wax is a good form of wax to also use to make candles, and it's supposed to burn nicely and not have a lot of smoke to it. And she asked if you could combine them. And my answer was, I have heard people doing that, but I haven't experimented with it myself. So I've seen blended candles, but I haven't experimented with it, so I really can't say for sure.
With there being so many different wick sizes, have you ever figured out a way to maybe braid the wick or intertwine it or something and then pickle it, so if you have a bigger candle but you didn't buy the big enough wick? Have you tried doing that? Does it work?
There are circumstances where people, the question was, can you combine wicks together to make a bigger wick for a bigger candle if the available wicks are not the right size, or like if you have a custom candle mold or something. There are, I have read of circumstances like that, but I have not experimented with braiding wicks myself. That's something I'd like to do someday.
A lot of those flat wicks already come braided.
A lot of the wicks already come braided. They're not all braided. Some are twisted. So there's a variety, but if you do need to adulterate, I would do some research. There's a lot of great candle making books out there to refer to for resources. Any other questions? This last slide is just a list. We talked about it in the beginning. What are other things you can do with beeswax? Well, I've had people ask me for beeswax to make their own furniture polish in the form of a cream that they rub on things, cutting boards even. And I've also had people ask for the wax to mix with flax oil to prepare the mast on their sailboat. There's so many neat things that people do. You can, and another person mentioned this, before we even get to the slide, half this stuff already got talked about. That's what's so cool about these groups and meetings. You can coat your own beeswax foundation or use it as a starter for your foundationless frames that go in your top bar hives or other hives. Water and rust proofing tools, cast iron items. It's an alternative to plastic wrap. If you're handy and you want to take some pretty little cloth, you can take shavings of wax, and I'm telling you now, whatever you shave the wax with is going to be wax coated forever. So just get yourself a cheap little grater. And then, yeah, you grate it on the fabric and you put it in a low temperature oven. I've tried dipping the fabric. It didn't have as good of a result. But the recipe that I heard works the best is to put the shavings on the fabric, low temperature oven, and then it will be a nice wrap for sandwiches or cling to a bowl and cover it. Yes?
I use an iron.
Iron. Awesome. I love it. I haven't tried that. And so much more. And here's a couple resources. There's a bazillion of resources, but I wanted to give you a couple. I buy a lot of the silicone molds that you saw here from Man Lake, and I know there's people out there exclusively that just do candle making supplies. I've also been experimenting with making candle molds. I see cool things, and I'm like, that would make a great candle. But silicone is really tricky to work with. At least this type of silicone, which is really lends itself to high temperature and repeat usage. It's a two-part process. It's really tricky. There's temperature involved, and I don't want to get into that. It's not in my skill set at this moment. But we have tried with some of the less expensive one-part silicones and had some pretty good results. So, you can experiment with that. Lee?
There's a guy on YouTube that actually took a plastic foundation and made a silicone mold out of it, so he could do his own wax foundation.
That is so awesome. That, and if it were me, I'd play with clay also. I'm a potter. I'd want to make like dishes and everything out of, honeycomb shapes. So this is not quite set to a point where I would be too excited to see people handle, because I can see liquid right under the surface. But if anybody wants to take a quick look at this, they can. But I will pull the wick through just so you can see what I do. Again, be very careful, but I use one finger to steady the wick as it goes down, and I gently pull it. Yes, I've pulled the wick all the way through before and had to start all over again. I had a wickless candle. And again, this one poured a little bit on the outside. So, there's always ways to fix it. You can try picking a piece off now, or you can wait until it's completely solid and taken out of the mold and go ahead and use a surface like I mentioned, possibly aluminum foil, possibly a pan that you designate to wax only, and try to re-even out your surface.
Is there a point where you've left it in the mold too long?
Yes, and then you trim the wick.
Yeah. No, I mean trying to get the
thing
out of the mold. Like if you come back tomorrow morning or tomorrow after work,
no.
Try to take it out.
No. I've left them in. As a matter of fact, really good point, because it made me think of something that I wanted to share that I didn't remember. Thank you. I leave them in there on purpose. For who could guess why? Preservation. So if I make these and they're sitting in a tote and there's 6 of them, they're eventually going to get dirty, dusty, nicked, discolored. Things do oxidize over time. So for me, fresh candles is like the bomb. Old candles that don't smell so good, not so exciting. So a lot of times I have more than one mold. I've got the crappy Buddha mold, and then I have another one, and I'll make 3 or 4 of them, and I keep them in the mold and take them out when needed. So, and then they're preserved nicely. Question?
Do you ever add anything like citronella to them, or?
I've experimented with essential oils and fragrance oils and colorants.
How'd that go?
Good. Very good. Fragrance oils, if you can find natural ones, work better than essential oils, because essential oils have other chemical compounds that don't naturally adhere to the wax and they can separate. and then that becomes an issue with burning the candles. Could be flammable, could, not burn evenly. Yeah, spitting, sputtering. So again, you'd have to have a designated area, again, because what if you put peppermint in this pot? It's probably going to have that peppermint essential oil forever. So what I did was I would designate like some paper cups and some other things to experiment with. I'd pour the liquid wax in with the amount recommended of fragrance oil or essential oil and mix it up and then pour it in the molds. And you may even have to designate the mold to that specific scent if you like it enough. So start with a couple scents, get familiar with them, designate, and then, at least peppermint and vanilla go good together. Well, thank you. You guys are awesome. You have another question?
Really dumb question.
Okay.
I was looking at a mold, a silicone mold, and it says 2-part. I thought 2 parts. Is that a top and a bottom?
I have,
Apparently it's a side and a side.
yeah, I have, this candle is a 2-part mold. And there is a little seam. You can see it. So not all the molds work really well. This came from Thorn in the UK. And I had to get a couple molds from them because they're not very present here, and I have to be different. I have to have different things than everybody else. So I got this one, and I got the food dog, and I got another one. And one of them is a 2-part mold, and it has a little indentation where it fits like a puzzle piece to the other side. And it works fine.
And you
I mean, I like
go
it.
ahead and either wrap it with your stockings or your rubber bands.
Rubber bands. Yep, rubber bands. Yep. And then this has a channel for the wick, where I didn't even have to put the chopsticks on the bottom. But also I noticed with these, the hole was very big. And what starts happening with these and some of the aluminum molds that you use to make the cylinders and the cool utilitarian candles, you have to have a way to stop the wax from coming out of the hole.
They dribble.
What is it? Sculpey works good? Yeah, any kind of modeling clay works good. I've used tape, I've used all kinds of stuff, but as long as you have a method, be careful because liquid hot wax melting out of your mold is not a fun and exciting.
If it's too hot, it will push the Sculpey out of the way, so you gotta get it
Just right,
where
yeah.
it's ready to cool.
Yep,
Leave it for a couple of seconds so you get a bottom, and then you can pull it up.
awesome,
The Sculpey will keep it from blowing up the bottom.
cool.
Why don't you repeat that so it goes on the video?
Sure, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about the size of the hole that the wick is going to come out of at the bottom of the mold, and some of them are large, and it's good to have a system set in place for making that hole a little smaller so that when you pour your liquid hot wax in there, it doesn't dribble out the bottom, and that could be very dangerous and extremely messy. So this nice woman mentioned Sculpey, which is a modeling, like a clay that you can use to make things, and then it gets hard, and it's really cool stuff. I've used modeling clay. I've used different types of tape. I've used like newspaper and then tape over it. It really just depends on the size of the hole and the wick. I've used even wax, but the other trick is to use a little bit of wax that isn't as hot. You can put a little bit of wax in there, but this can also be a problem. If you put a little bit of wax in your mold and you don't pour the entire candle all in one fell swoop, you're going to have lines showing in the candle where you stopped and started pouring again. So those are other parts of the technique that you'll want to know, besides the not cooling it too fast and getting cracks.
The bottom of your mold is the top of your.
Is the top of your, yep. So the bottom, as Lee said, the bottom of your mold is the top of your candle. And when they do shrink, which we talked about before, occasionally there's a little hole. If it's a large candle or it's a straight-sided candle and you've poured it, it may start to shrink, and that's the only time that you would have a little bit of play in coming back while it's still quite liquid and starting to set up and adding a little bit more hot wax to it. And hopefully you don't get that line, but you're going to have to develop your own techniques and play with it. So thank you again.